Thank you very much, and hello, everyone. Once again, I'm Ken Jimbo, Managing Director of the International House of Japan based in Roppongi. And it's a great pleasure to moderate this session entitled AI and Geopolitics, Navigating Power and Security in a Chaotic World. And this is actually the first time that the G1 Global has explored the intersection between AI and geopolitics. And over past years, I've been moderated a lot of session over geopolitics, U.S.-Japan relations, alliance, China, those aspects. But I felt like, it's a kind of, good old stories. And it's like a koten rakugo things, and which means that you sounds really familiar to what we are discussing about in a quite different, slightly different, fashions and manners. But I think that we are trying to explore some new fields, what is really at stake in the geopolitics. And I think that has been really much coming from the technology, especially from how the AI, the concept of the autonomy and emerging technology has been directly changing the battlefields. And it's a really rapidly, changing the concept of what we are getting at in these concepts. So we are now seeing the AI moves from innovation labs to the front line of the battlefields. In Ukraine, drone warfare, as you see almost every day, and also in the Israel's pinpoint operation against Iran. And we also saw that the war in the Azerbaijan, that I think that the main equipments and technology that you can see is the drone system, which is unmanned autonomy, and then that really changed I think at how the battlefields has been defined. And I think that in a way that algorithms are accelerating decision once made only by humans, now I think at outsource in a way how much that the technologies and machines are now involved in those decision dynamics. And AI is not only changing how the wars are fought, but how war is exercised. So compressing time, expanding reach, and challenging how the leaders control the escalation. So I believe these themes are very relevant to the interest of many audiences gathered here. So today we are very fortunate to have outstanding panelists who each brings a unique vantage point. And Kenneth is joining from London. Actually, it's 4 a.m. In the morning, so I just asked him whether he stayed up late or woke up early, and he actually told me that he woke up early. So I wonder what time he slept. But so very grateful that he decided to contribute despite his time zone. And Professor Tomo Furutani, my good colleague at Keio University, an expert on decision system and edge AI technologies that are defining speed and control in modern warfare. And also we have Emma from Asia Society Policy Institute, who brings deep insight into how alliances like US-Japan Partnership, AUKUS, and Quad adapt to this new technological tempo. So together, we'll ask, what does AI mean for power and for trust and for the stability of the world order? So let's begin by asking Kenneth. I would like to wake him up. So from your global perspective, what does today's battlefield automation tell us about how AI is redistributing power and agency among the states? Kenneth, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Jimbo-san. It's an excellent question. It's sort of the essential one. So what we're seeing in Ukraine is a transformation in real time in how major combatants are actually waging war. The innovation scale and the innovation speed has been enormous. And part of that is because if you think about the 20th century model of how countries defended themselves, it looked like the 20th century corporation, this large monolithic entity, very much actually like Japanese trading companies in some ways, which is that it would have lots of people there, a strong bureaucracy, lots of processes, and long cycle times to make decisions and to ensure that those decisions are the adequate ones, lots of studies, lots of procurement policies, credit along the way. And that model has completely shifted to what might be looking like a Silicon Valley model. Now, we're often thinking about defense technology in the form of, well, what is the products of what they're creating? And that's very important. But I also want to shift the focus to what is the process by which they create those products. And the reason why is that in some ways, the process is going to become more important than the product. And why I say that is that in the case of the Ukraine, I was recently talking to some officers there who had been, who were visiting London, and they were saying that the time for their materiel of usage was 2 months. After 2 months, whatever strategic advantage they had, for example, with a new type of drone, they were going to presume was going to be outdated and they needed to modify it. So one element of that is that the product itself needs to be modifiable so that the closed standards that have typically characterized defense technology is no longer going to be appropriate, that you need to have some sort of open interfaces so that the soldiers who can modify it are able to do so in real time. But the second point is the modifying itself, which is if you have a 2-month cycle time, that becomes a serious difficulty in terms of how you treat your material to have the flexibility and adaptability that you need in a live setting if you're involved in a conflict. So that process requires a different mindset. It also probably might require different companies to enable it. So the classical defense prime contractors, the primes, might not be the ones who I should also say are excellent at creating what's called these large platforms, whether it's an aircraft carrier or a tank or an anti-aircraft system. Those systems will still be needed, but we probably don't need them exclusively. I should not say probably. We will not need them exclusively, and it's going to be these small companies with these smarter and faster processes making smaller weapon systems or defensive systems that will be the ones to rule the day. And so, just as we have seen the great, change in how a computer looks like from a large desktop and a mainframe to an iPhone that is so much more performant, so too this is the iPhone moment of the military, in which it needs to reimagine how it operates.
Well, Ken, thank you very much. I'd like to have a follow-up question because you, laid out how that the very kind of quick cycle of the battlefield innovation takes place, especially in Ukraine, and I think it's the cycle of the weeks and if less than months that the collection of the data and what's going, the assessment of the battlefields, feedback into the headquarters, and then that you bring in many of the new technologies to be adopted, and then to deploy in the battlefield in a very much quick cycle. And what does it really mean for the future, like a defense planning processes? For example, you are in UK, you come up with the most recent like a defense documents, and then there's lots of like a defense industry that is involved in the long-term strategy section. But you mentioned that there has been the emergence of the importance of the like dual-use technologies and civilian sectors to dynamically involve in those everyday evolution processes in the defense industry. What do you think that what could be the prototype should look like when we think about the lessons learned from Ukraine?
So it's sad. I mean, the lessons learned from Ukraine is going to be fast development cycles, smaller companies, smaller weapon systems. I want to answer your question, but I also want to hold out some hope. Okay, so I'm going to get to this idea of the defense and sort of what would a defensive, more humane laws of war, Geneva Convention AI system look like. want to get to that. But to answer your question, what is the world going to look like? Well, it's going to look like what's actually happening in Ukraine. Seems like a test case of how conflicts will look in the future. The most important would be the idea of whether you're actually going to have human beings on the front lines anymore. Elon Musk recently spoke at West Point and just simply blurted out what seemed to be natural to him and seemed very novel to the more senior officer who was interviewing him. That why would you have a human being on the front line anymore? That doesn't really make any sense. If by the time an individual can actually hear or see a drone, they've got 2 or 3 minutes to find armored cover, very strongly armored cover, because they're going to be they'll be killed. And there is technologies like what's called the loitering munition, which is you throw up a drone, it simply surveys the area of interest, in this case, the theater of war. When it sees soldiers or of the enemy or material of the enemy, it swoops in and then explodes. And so this new way of having to reimagine conflict is in fact the way with which military planners are going to have to completely reimagine what they actually do, and of course AI is going to change the speed with which they are able to do it. And then the question I think we're going to get to is whether there should be humans in the loop, and whether that should be humans in the loop in the offensive or defensive element of the weapons. Let me now circle back to what I was referring to, which I think is almost, we'll call it sci-fi pacifism, which is if we have these new technologies and everything changes, then we need the open-mindedness, the plasticity of mind to imagine how these weapons can adhere to what the 19th and more importantly, the 20th century created, which was the quote unquote laws of war. What that meant is just very basic features in which, if countries are going to fight each other, how can you treat basic principles with which all parties can nevertheless still accept? For example, that a surrender is recognized, that prisoners of war are treated humanely, that civilians are not targeted, something that in the 20th century was sadly left in abeyance, was not respected. But you could imagine that it would be war, if it is inevitable, it would be better to do it that way. I believe there's a short window of opportunity, and these technologies enable not only to support the offensive element of the weapons, but also the defensive, and also a way to build in more humanity. So you could imagine drones that have, because they have geolocation sensors, know if they're in a civilian area or an area of combat, and maybe do different things. If it has image recognition, it can identify that these are civilians and non-combatants, and therefore do other things, actually act defensively, not act offensively. Today, we are not even having that conversation because it just seems so far-fetched. But although it might sound utopian, it shouldn't be, because again, the 19th and the 20th century created the Geneva Conventions. Wouldn't it be interesting if we could instantiate them into our weapon systems?
Well, thank you so much. I think you have laid out the great, sets of discussion in the later rounds of this panel as well. But let me turn to Tomo Furutani-san, and he's one of the quite rare figure in this field, because when you talk about like Japanese future defense plannings, and you have Ministry of Defense and ATLA, who are dealing with all the technological hardware developments and connecting those kind of US concept to how the SDF future technology will be aligned with each other. But you rarely find those people who can really talk about the concept might look like. And now he's discovering these fields, working closely with the industry and the Ministry of Defense. So very curious to know what you're now getting at, but especially that when you've been, dealing with edge cortex work, that vividly showed how the edge AI components compresses the so-called the OODA group. In Japan, we call it PDCA. Cycle, but all the kind of observe, orient, decision, and action move to very much in a short period of time. So you've been focusing on those aspects, but how much does it really translate into the defense deterrence, the decision making, those kind of, all cultures involved in the military domains? And if you could really also touch upon what could be the Japanese context of observing those changes would be great.
Thank you, Ken, and thank you for inviting me to this very nice places. I'm very fascinated to be here. And I'm not a political scientist. I'm teaching statistics and data science and AI. Maybe most of you dislike statistics classroom, yeah, and undergraduate school. Many of us mainly focusing on the edge devices or AI systems or drones. But the reality in the battlefield in the Ukraine or Gaza or even in Iran or Kazakhstan, any kind of data set gathered to the data centers from any kind of the intelligence sources like IMINT to SIGINT or MASINT to ASINT, yeah. So gathered to the joint systems, and such kind of data center operated by, for example, the nuclear power plant, and analyzed by using the AI software. So software is very crucial, and these datasets or analysis results are shared from the command troops to the headquarters. So the speed of the sharing the dataset is very crucial. So this kind of asset the superpower countries could hold is one of the crucial points. And the second point is that the quality and quantity of dataset, I guess. The modern warfare could be said as, or could be expressed as a data warfare. So data winner could be an AI competition winner, I guess. So this means that the data winner could be become AI hegemony company. So what kind of dataset or what kind of qualified dataset is very crucial for the superpower countries? If they become. And when we see in looking at the battlefield that so US, Russia, China, and Ukraine seem to succeed to collect dataset in the ground battlefield and also space battlefield. But when our eyes turn to the Indo-Pacific regions, maybe we need to consider about the maritime deterrence or maritime battlefield. So if in the next step, these countries, including Japan or India and other Eastern Asian countries, we need to collect the dataset of the necessary for the maritime deterrence when applied to the AI systems to the next expected battlefield. The third point is that I expect that we need to establish the defense industry ecosystems, including AI, also spaces, and also the semiconductor parts. Maybe we will discuss about this issue later, but the US, UK, or NATO countries are very successful to introduce the promotion systems to inviting the SMEs, small medium enterprises, also the venture capital, venture companies. So maybe we need to consider about that, yeah, in the later. Yeah.
I want to discuss now. Right. And when you talk about comparison, especially how the U.S. created DARPA for especially the seed technologies, and then the DIU to connect those newly invented technologies into the procurement processes. But Japan has been long said that there is a valley of death between you have so many Nobel Prize winner type of the basic science there, and then we have a lot of like advanced procurements. But in between, there's a very limited bridging system between how the kind of component of technologies can be materialized as equipment. And how do you assess the current situation?
Well, I guess I can comment from viewpoint of the procurement and the R&D. Regarding the procurement and achievement, we are advising the ATRA or JMOD to change the process of procurement and achievement, because Mary, JMOD and Atla mainly focuses only on the prime 15 companies like MHA or IHA, but it's mainly for the acquisition for the traditional hard assets. But when we need to, when we achieve or procure the new assets like AI or softwares, when maybe we need to change the procurement system. We need to change the speed of procurement achievement. That's one point. Another point is R&D. And recently, Atla succeeded to establish the DISTI. It's an Institute of the Development and the Research, but it's just like a copy of DARPA.
Right.
But when we consider the R&D, we need more fund money or seed money to invest the R&D sections or new venture companies. Also, yeah, we need to connect with the VCs or trust banks to promote the SMEs or venture companies. So when we look into the US DoD, they have this kind of supporting system to funding systems for SMEs or venture capitals. So maybe we need to learn about that. Yeah.
Right. So I see a couple of venture capitalists and tech people here sitting down, and when you talk about defense domains in Japan, so that landscape will be rapidly changing, so to say. Right.
So, well, in Japan, that because of the reputation risk in the defense tech industry, Japanese venture capitalists or Japanese trust banks wouldn't like to invest to the defense techs. But recently, we are talking with the UK, US defense tech venture capitalists or trust banks. They are focusing on the Japanese SMEs, venture companies. So they are pushing the Japanese SMEs to the defense industries. But when as we are lacking the Japanese defense venture capitalists or defense trust banks in this field, after the overseas investors invested the Japanese SMEs or venture capitals, maybe the Japanese technology maybe go outside overseas. So we are concerned about now.
All right, I'll come back to this point later, but I'd like to turn over to Emma. And Emma has been working on US-Japan relations, serious observer of the Japanese politics, and now she's working on wider fields on geopolitics in Asia. Recently conducted the projects on the Quad, US, Japan, Australia, India, strategic cooperation, and then she's very much interested in the growing kind of mini-lateralism networks that has been taking place in Asia. So Emma, introduce some of what you're now getting at, and also how those kind of emerging technologies domains mattered to alliance and partnership relations.
Thanks, Ken. What I come to, not as an AI expert at all, is just how rapidly shifting this field is, and how probably our states, particularly given the tensions that exist geopolitically, are not well equipped to deal with this. So it's a sort of akin in my mind to an arms race, right? Because there's tremendous risks, but perhaps some opportunities. But what we need in order to sort of harness it and to protect against abuse is institutions, but they're not necessarily the same multilateral institutions that we have right now, which at any rate are under some degree of strain, particularly those that rely on American leadership, frankly. But when I look at the Quad, for example, and we did just publish a report on sort of prospects for the Quad and regional perceptions of the Quad, there is an attempt at the working level to try and address this. So there is a working group that's on, critical minerals and emerging technology. So they have laudable goals, but the question of whether or not the institution of the Quad can be strong enough to ensure safety in AI, to establish ethical guardrails to some extent, to prevent not just tragic consequences on the battlefield, but also in our information space. There's a AI allows you to deliver misinformation that very much polarizes our societies too. So I think that if it's functioning correctly, the Quad can bring together these 4 countries to establish these international standards. But it takes strategic trust in order to do that. And that is unfortunately, in scarcity right now because of tariff negotiations, because of differing approaches to a number of conflicts. But I think that it would be particularly helpful if the Quad reoriented itself to a free and open Indo-Pacific in the AI space, as well as in freedom of navigation and the other traditional defense models that we focused on.
And when you talk about defense industry cooperation, and even before getting into the emerging technologies, that we also have to talk about the legacy technology cooperation. And what has been taking place, of course, in the AUKUS is the provision of the nuclear propellant submarine to Australia, and that is supposed to be co-produced and to be delivered in sometime in 2040 something. In the meantime, that United States has pledged to provide the Virginia-class submarine to Australia. But what is take place is some kind of bottleneck in the U.S. production capacity over the shipbuildings and the submarine building, and all kinds of the steel things are going to take place. So, and Emma, how do you see those kind of, the concept has been quite emerging, coming from all the Joint Chiefs about the battle concept of the future. But the United States has its own problem in those capacity issues on how they can really provide the basic bottom line of how the technologies can be delivering. That's number one. And secondly, during the opening session, that I think it was Bill Lemon talked about like a GCAP program that has been taking place between UK, Japan, and Italy. And of course, whenever I talk about the next generation technologies, international collaboration model, some countries are seeking to have an alternative model to not partnering with the United States, but having its own kind of autonomy of tech cooperation. And from the Washington, New York point of view, how do you see these kind of the trends of the international collaboration taking place when the United States probably have its own fundamental issues?
Okay, that's a huge number of questions, but I'll try and answer them. Well, first of all, on AUKUS, my understanding is that AUKUS survived the review at the Pentagon, more or less, but I guess we'll find that out. I worked on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee when AUKUS was first introduced, and the number of competing interests are tremendous, obviously, in this field. And the time horizon is so far into the future of actually providing submarines, nuclear submarines to Australia. And this administration especially patience is not the hallmark, at all. So I think that Pillar 1, it's far in the future. Right now, it's just Australia feeding into the U.S. industrial base, and that is okay with this administration. Pillar 2, I think actually is much more significant, at least in the medium term, and particularly for Japan and for other countries in the Indo-Pacific. And I think it actually has more promise than a framework like the Quad. The Quad has the right sort of countries in the room, but it's so leader-driven that it can fall apart. Right? AUKUS is a bit more institutionalized, and it's sort of cushioned because it's not just the United States. I mean, the United States is involved, but the UK as a sort of trusted partner Australia and Japan have, very well established relationships and interoperability, at least goals to get to. So I actually think that Japan offers a lot to the Pillar 2 partnership in AI. I mean, a lot of expertise. It also has a focus on sort of the human element here that is probably attractive to the other partners there. What it needs, though, and Japan also, by the way, is very much a trusted partner in the region that emerged from this Quad research that, Southeast Asia doesn't want to be caught in the middle of US and Japan in traditional military ways or in the AI way either. And Japan is a useful interlocutor there. But Pillar 2 still needs, a legal framework. It needs treaties in order to establish the rules of the road, and particularly to keep all of the countries that are involved sort of on board, so that we're still at least like using the same playbook in developing these technologies. What was the second question?
U.S. production capacity and...
Yeah, I mean, we just can't build chips anymore, I mean, that's a huge problem. Although, somewhat ironically, it might help us to develop more bilateral, trilateral cooperation with countries like Japan and South Korea that actually have that capacity because of a necessity just of needing that.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to come back to Kenneth, and especially coming back again on the AI question. And you've written about how humans frame decisions. And there's a lot of concepts like a human in the loop, human on the loop, and human out of the loop. Whenever we think about the distance between how the humans should be involved in those decision-making processes. And you touch upon briefly in your first remark as well. But what happens when that framing is partly outsourced to algorithms? And especially there should be a lot of temptation. Used to be we call it, the human can really fix the error of the technologies. But now, I think that, technologies can fix the error of the humans in many regards. So in that context, when we have a lots of reliance on the, large data processing, and the quality decision could be made by those machines. What do you think that, the boundary between how the humans should be involved in the decision making, especially in the domain of the military? And the second question is about, do you have any kind of different standards from the US, China, Russia perspective on how the autonomy of the military domain and decisions are involved? Are there any kind of ethical standards division or any kind of large language model standards division on the tech side can really create the new blocks in talking about geopolitics and AI?
Well, there's a lot there. I'll take the last one first, because my memory at 4 a.m. is not as strong as it ought to be. Should there be any geopolitical blocks related to AI, particularly maybe with LLMs? And the answer is, well, certainly, of course, we should have, as Emma was pointing out in terms of the hardware of chip making, isn't it interesting if America has given up its capacity to make high-end chips to other countries over the past 30 years, that this is a chance for renewing its relationships with other allies around the world. And I think that the same thing is going to happen with AI and lots of other domains. Right now, America has, of course, an extraordinary advantage and a lead on the rest of the world in terms of developing the models that AI relies on. But that's not going to last, right? Just because it's going to become more democratized. There's very smart people elsewhere. In fact, America has this great lead because it's been a magnet of so much talent at the undergraduate and graduate school level, which is the, if you will, the harvest. It's the seed corn of tomorrow's innovation, and America is giving that up, sadly, through policies that it's making. That is sort of putting a tourniquet onto the university and onto science and research. And so it will need to rely on its partners more than ever, and the talent around the world. America might still have more of the capital and might have a stronger capitalism to enable companies to grow and become strong and to flourish. But it will still. But the idea of an algorithmic block is is certainly the way that things are going to go, because in some ways there is an alliance of countries who perceive a threat by its neighbors, whether it's Russia or whether it's China or anyone else, that what was once called sort of the concert of democracies or the coalition of democracies under the Biden administration, just because the administration hasn't changed, that national security interest among westernized or industrialized open societies remains. And so we actually need to renew those links. Now, Jimbo-san, please remind me, the first part of your question was actually the more substantial one. So remind me what that is so I can go right into it.
All right. So that's a human in the loop question.
Yes.
Yeah. And actually that, whenever we talk about how that, importance of like decision in the like military planning. Of course, there's a President Trump decision to attack Iran on one thing, but how they can really process the success of making that operation quite effective. At the same time, how to control the escalation of how Iran will strike back to the U.S. and how you can really, stop the escalation into the wider scale of the regional conflict is another thing. So there's so many layers of the decision that you really need to make on one operation, and then at how the human should be, inside the loop is one of the kind of the, I think structural question that you really need to look into. Well, what do you think at how much autonomy that you can actually achieve in those dynamics, and what are the risks associated with it?
Okay, that's a great question, and let's also remember you said something that was very witty. It was a cute clip, but we should really examine it, which is whether the human beings are the most apt entity to make some of these decisions, or whether the computer might make better decisions and rational decisions, and that humans should willingly give up their autonomy to machines. That is a very alluring view, particularly because it's very humbling, and it's a very postmodern view in the sense that we understand over the last 40 years, because of Daniel Kahneman and others in behavioral psychology, about all of the cognitive biases that humans have that suggest that we are not very good decision makers and that maybe a machine can do better. In fact, there's a lot of studies that show that when you hand certain decisions over to an algorithm or a machine or statistics, rather than, for example, making the decision on your own, you get better decisions, but you certainly also might get more consistent decisions. Judges in a criminal trial, for example, give different sentences depending on whether it's before lunch or after lunch, for example, which if justice is blind, that shouldn't be the case. As one small example. So it's alluring to say that we should give up more decision-making to the computer. And of course, if war is happening at a hypersonic speed, then it would actually be enabling an adversary, it would be forfeiting some control for security of the realm to try to be precious about it and say, no, a human being should do this and not a machine. The problem, though, is that machines are fallible, and we only know that later because we're not accustomed to understanding how they're fallible. The story of LLMs should give us all pause, because we would never, as a mathematician, you'd never use a calculator that gave you wrong answers. Yet people are doing that with words, and we're accepting that, we're tolerating that from our technology. And we're also learning that we only find out about the problems later, after, for example, in the case of Deloitte in Australia, they submitted a report to the government, a top tier business consultancy submitted a report to the government that was flawed because it had been partially written with AI, and they had hallucinated and they didn't have the safeguards around it. That's not a flaw of the implementation of the technology. That is just the new way in which we're going to have these problems going forward. So I believe that we should take the human out of the loop for non-critical issues. And certainly on the defensive side, that you should be precious and try to put the human in the loop and ensure that they're always there. But for critical decisions, very important decisions, you should have a human in the loop. You might want to have several there to make decisions. And the reason why is, particularly in warfare, the situation is always uncertain, it's always changing. And there's lots of instances in military history where it required a flexibility of thinking that if you were too rigid because you give it to a technology system, that it's going to come up with the wrong answer. And I'll give you the famous example of that, although there's many everywhere you look, is during the Cuban Missile Crisis, when Kennedy and his advisors got a very hostile, very belligerent message from Khrushchev. And they didn't know what to do because they had to respond in kind. And then a couple hours later, they got a second one that was much more toned down. They didn't understand what to do, but they realized, wait a minute. It shows that there's a dissent in the Kremlin, that there's not just one voice, there's actually two. So what do? They very deliberately decided to respond only to the second message, not to the first one. And that unlocked negotiations. And of course, the world was on edge that there would be another atomic explosion after the first one, after the war. Yet that didn't happen. And it didn't happen because of the wisdom of Kennedy and his aides, and also people in the Kremlin, let us not forget, to temper down the conflict rather than put the flames up higher. So for that reason, I would hope that we will always have humans in the loop, but hopefully working with machines, because we know that just like with chess and Go and elsewhere, when you combine the computer and the machine, you get something better. I think that's hopefully that centaur in Greek mythology, the half man, half horse creature, that centaur approach to interacting with the algorithmic age will be the one that we choose, rather than giving it all to the machine, because it'll look good until it doesn't.
Well, thank you so much, and great that you trace back the history of the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, where world avoided the nuclear war between U.S. and Soviet Union. And I wonder whether the XCOM that the Kennedy administration has organized being organized by the AI, and then all kind of citing all the kind of information coming from Moscow, and then to make a decision whether we have been successful in avoiding that crisis or not will be very interesting experiment that we can really do further. So we do have a 16 minutes.
May I pick up on one thing?
Oh, right, sure, of course.
Just to pick up one thing on it. The solution, if you will, it's a very interesting. What you raised, Ken, is a very interesting thought. So what you'd want to do is if you have a committee of 6 people, have a 7th and have the AI be the 7th. Obviously, many businesses are doing that now by creating a digital twin of a CEO or of a director, and to join the meeting and to give feedback in the meeting. It doesn't have to be a digital twin; it could just be its own and say, Claude, you've been listening to our conversation for the last 30 minutes. What should we be talking about that we are not? What are some gaps in our thinking? And Claude or any other AI system can offer some good advice. So in other words, in the future, we actually may say that there will be different AIs sitting in the committee with the human beings, offering thoughts.
Right. It may be depending upon how the LLM might be really tracing the character of Curtis LeMay, or somebody like
God.
probably bombing the Cuba, invading Cuba will be the option they might respond. But let's move on to the Q&A, and we do have 15 minutes, and let's open the floor. If you have any kind of question, please do so. Yes, starting from on the first row. Let's take a couple of questions.
Hi, I'm Ellie. I'm a full-time student. I'm also doing UX consulting for a Polish company that does work for United Nations. And one of the things that we're being considering is the effect of the EU AI Act, which is considered a landmark. How do you think will affect other countries, particularly Japan?
Hi, thank you very much. technically difficult to understand as a non-expert, but it's a great session. Thank you very much. My question is relatively simple. So with AI and without AI, how AI can be used, for the peace, to navigating these powers, and then how we, as an industry people like me, I lead a biopharmaceutical company in Japan, can help.
Okay, another question, one more probably before. Okay, let's take it.
Thank you. I'm a CEO and the founder of the Japanese startup company, Maritime Robotics, named Oceanic Constellations, and we are building the swarm of USB drones actually on the water surface. And I have a practical question for you all about the how to use AI for the implementation of the swarm of the control of the vehicles. We are actually in the process of proportionalizing what's the upper limit for single or two people controlling the unmanned assets as the upper limit. So just wondering if we can really do the controlling the 100 unmanned asset on the water or not. And that question might be going to the same situation in the UAV situation when using the limited people using the so many unmanned assets. But I think there should be some ethical or practical limit, upper limit for controlling the units. So I just want a thought from you all how we should be thinking about the upper limit as a practical player. Thank you.
Okay, let's have Furutani-san, especially he is interested in the last question, but any question that you want to take.
Regarding the first question, very nice question. And regarding the EU AI Act, as you know, that EU Act is a rule-based act, and regarding the Japanese AI Act, it's a human-centric act. Yeah, and well, the Japanese Act is much resemble to the US Act because the US and Japan is similar to they are introducing the innovation-based the AI industry, so the environment of the industry is very similar. So maybe the Japanese resemble to not so the EU, but the AI state. And regarding the second question, that the EU is, the AI is, if we succeed to introduce the credible and responsible AI, maybe it's helpful to deter the warfare, I guess. Because, for example, in the battlefield, the red countries are launching the suicide drones, even if the success rate is less than the 60%, but maybe the blue countries need to launch or hesitate to launch the suicide drones, even if the success rate is over the 99%. So maybe if we could improve this kind of credibility or responsibility, it's maybe helpful for the deterrence of warfare. And the final question. Well, actually, I'm also working with the US companies, and yeah. So, well, as you know, in the battlefield in the Ukraine, Russia, and Iran, that the number of the drones are increased, the operators or also the labor forces are also increased. So, so that's a crucial point, I guess. But in the looking at in the maritime situations, maybe many of the maritime assets need to be operated by autonomously. So because not only the USB, but we need to operate the AUV. So we need to introduce the autonomous systems by reducing the number of operators. Yeah, that's a question. Yeah, answer.
He also asked about the ethical challenges, especially on the swarm
yes.
Technologies.
Well, it's similar to the second situation, that the ethical one is maybe the successfulness of the attacks rate or something like that. So it's up to the situations of what kind of the ethical and credible AI system we could introduce. Yeah.
Right. It's unexpected that Tom take care of all the questions, and he is more professor than things. Emma, Kenneth, if you have any kind of additional perspective on these questions.
So I'm actually sort of going back to some of the things that Ken has said before, because I think it's very interesting to draw out this, the where we needed humans to be at the forefront of making these decisions when you come up to, the brink of something really dangerous. And it's sort of a little bit of an element of hope, looking historically at least, that in the post World War II period, we did build institutions to ensure against mutually assured destruction. We did come up with the NPT and all the arms control talks that we had with the Soviet Union. And all of these things exist but are still weak right now. And so we need sort of new models to deal with new technologies. But I think that they very much, the historical example very much shows that you do need a degree of human judgment in order to make this a less risky proposition.
Kenneth, are you okay with that? Can we go for second round, or you have a?
There was a question on by the gentleman who runs a biopharma company in Japan about how you would instantiate peace. I want to go to a second round. I'll go as quickly as I possibly can, simply to say there might be 4 things that you could, just to begin the conversation, not to sort of develop it, that you could think about how we would actually develop new technologies that would also would aid the cause of peace, not just simply war. And the first one would be, if you're putting a sensor into all of these munitions, as you are, you're collecting data, so you could actually show to yourself and to the world that you're trying to act more humanely rather than less. Precision weapons and hyper precision weapons would be better than ones that are blunt, that go after say large areas, particularly in urban areas of people, rather than go after a single target, which would be better. You could imagine weapons that would become non-lethal weapons. So even in a battlefield where you are actually injuring your opponent rather than actually killing your opponent. It's terrible to even think about these things, but if you're going to have war, you should actually have war that maybe is more humane than others. And then finally, can you actually build in the Geneva Conventions into the weapon system so that the tools themselves can act humanely? An example would be, can a drone accept a surrender of a soldier in the battlefield? There are cases of Russians who have been trying to surrender to Ukrainian drones, and of course the drone cannot accept the prisoner of war. But can you actually imagine a world in which that does happen? Would that be better? Those are the few things that I put out.
Great, thank you very much. Let's go to the second round. If you have probably 1 or 2 additional questions. Okay.
Thanks, Robert Feldman from Morgan Stanley. In William McNeil's book, Pursuit of Power, which was about military technology and who succeeded over the years. His point was that the people who succeed with the new technologies don't succeed because of the technology. They succeed because they have reorganized their forces to use the technology most effectively. Examples being Nobunaga, for example. Okay, what changes in military organizations do you need to be more effective using AI?
Great question. Probably one more. Yeah, Robin, please.
Hi, Robin Niblett from Chatham House. A question for anyone. Do you think AI leads to a more peaceful world? So does it have a deterrent effect? Looking at the limits of Russian capabilities right now, pretty much stuck in a stalemate. Or could it play the other way around? There's such a race to get to the top that actually provokes negative outcomes.
Okay, and then I will add my own question last, and then for asking the panelists to have a final remark. And my question is directly to Tomo, that we're having aging society, and our defense requirements is keep on growing. And we do have a very long coastline, vast exclusive economic zones, and what we have to do is enormously demanding. How much those technologies, AI, can really deliver to those questions is one. So I would like to have in reverse order. So Emma first, Tom second, and Kenneth last. So can I ask Emma?
Just final thoughts, right? In studying sort of the international and particularly regional institutions in the last bit, it's been more and more not about keeping countries like India inside the loop, but keeping the United States inside. And I think we're at a turning point right now about whether or not the United States is going to continue to engage in the multilateral game and institutions at all anymore. And AI is one of the areas that is the most sort of volatile. And if the United States does not demonstrate the leadership that it traditionally has, I do hope that countries like Japan and other like-minded countries are going to continue to, stabilize, particularly with, uncertain technologies like AI.
Well, my answer is related to your question, previous question, but the human out of the loop is not to be assumed because even the Russia or China, the military officers wouldn't like to be operated by the machines or AI. So maybe human in the loop or human on the loop is the basics. But the AI itself has biases and the speed of decision making too fast than the human beings. So as I mentioned, the credibility or responsibility is a very crucial point. And yes, so but regarding the professor's comment question that maybe the reorganization or rebalancing might be occurred in maybe at the next, not so decades, but 5-6 years. Because after the superpower countries finished to collect the good data set to become an AI hegemony country, maybe the tendency of the AI hegemony is expected to be continued until maybe the beginning of 22nd century. So maybe the next 5-6 years, maybe the good one, maybe how to say, the crucial years, I guess.
Thank you. And Kenneth, for your final remarks.
Yeah, these are great questions. All three of them are fabulous. To Robert's, point taken about the not the technology themselves, but the reorganization of how the technologies are implemented. As you know, that's actually a feature of all of economic history. The electrification of factories was all about not just bringing in, or actually steam first and then electrification, but for steam, it was really about reorganizing how the factory was actually architecturally designed. Same with militaries. So I think the lesson there, to extrapolate exactly your point, is you will have technology teams associated, as close to gemba, as we say in Japan, right, as close to the action as possible on the factory floor. So you'll have the monozukuri platoons, and the monozukuri platoon will be a corps of soldiers whose job it is to work with the technology and to modify it on the fly as the need requires. We don't have anything like that today in today's forces, but that, of course, will be the direct correlation of all the things we've discussed so far in the past hour. To Sir Robin's challenge and question to us, which is, will AI make for a more peaceful world or a more dangerous one? I think certainly a more dangerous one. That's why I promote the idea that we need to stretch our thinking and imagine a world in which we can actually use these technologies for the purpose of the shield, not the sword, in the case of defense tech, for the fortification rather than the armament. But that requires a deliberate decision to go forward to it, because I think it's closer in the nature of this technology to lead to our inability, humans' ability to control it, because we're so poor at doing that, particularly at the outset of a new technology.
Well, thank you very much for engaging in this session. This concludes our session, and please join me by thanking all the panelists, especially Kenneth, joining from London.